Greetings, internet community. I'm Mike Lewis. I'm here with David Lafferty and Brett Salkeld, both from our glorious neighbors to the north in Canada. Or I guess I'm their neighbor to the south. I'm outnumbered. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, Mike.
Good.
So today we are talking. We're doing an episode of The Critical Catholic, where we talk about conspiracy theories and how to think critically and how to be a faithful person who uses reason. Today's episode is going to be throw a little bit of a wrinkle into some of the things we've talked about in earlier editions. What happens when conspiracy theorists actually land on something that's partially right? And what happens? I don't know, David, if you why don't we first just check in with you guys? Brett, what's new with you? Welcome back. First time we're both on the air at the same time. I'm a little rusty, as everyone can tell.
Yeah, no, it's good to be here. Yeah, well, lots going on. Busy time, but yeah, when the lab leaks thing kind of blew up, like shortly after we recorded our last episode that I was on with David 2 weeks ago, I just thought, like, there's some thinking through to be done here, because it looks like, I mean, the surface read is like, oh, the conspiracy theorists were right all along, and that can lead to a lot of confusion. So I just wrote you guys and said, like, hey, I think there's a conversation worth having around this lab leaks thing, and then a few other connected points that we've chatted about by email over the last week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, welcome once again. I don't know if you have any opening thoughts, and then maybe you can lead us with your prayer.
Yeah, well, I when Brett suggested this topic, I thought, yeah, this is actually a great thing to look at, because we got to be careful not to fall into the sort of opposite trap of, like, where with conspiracy theory, people reject everything that the sort of mainstream narrative or the mainstream media presents. We have to avoid the trap of just rejecting everything that maybe is floating around out there, the theories that are floating around, because we have to keep a little bit of an open mind, although we still have to maintain our critical faculties and try to sort fact from fiction. So I think this is actually a fantastic topic, because we're seeing some of this happen right now. People are trying to sort fact from fiction and try to figure out, what do we do now when it seems that maybe some of these conspiracy theorists about COVID-19 were a little right when it comes to one particular thing. So we'll continue with that in a minute. But first, I'll just offer a quick prayer to get us started and to guide our conversation. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, please guide us in our discussion. Help us to dispel confusion, discern fact from fiction, and cleave to the truth. Allow us to contribute to the creation of a healthy Catholic media culture. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So
I love the verb cleave.
What's that?
I love the verb cleave.
I know. I was just thinking about that.
I love cleaving. Yeah.
Where did you get the prayer? Did you write it? Did you
that one I just wrote.
Wow.
This idea of cleaving to the truth, it's fascinating to me, because as Catholics we're supposed to cleave to the truth of the Catholic faith, right? But I thought also, as Catholics, I think we need to cleave as close as possible to the objective truth, the empirical, actual truth out there. So we need to do both. We can't sort of blind ourselves when it comes to the objective truth and critical thinking and that sort of thing. So that's where that comes from.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the main one of the main threads in Catholic thought is that faith and reason shouldn't come into conflict with one another. And one of the things that we notice quite frequently in fundamentalist thought is that the theological concept is that the scientific finding is sometimes seen as in conflict with the theological concept, and then the two of them have to fight it out. And of course, if you're a religious person, especially if you have a little strand of religious fundamentalism in you, then you might resort to things like confirmation bias or any excuse is a good excuse to defend your position. And so I think this may be when we talk about faith and reason, Brett, you mentioned that some people have said to you, like, you shouldn't be voicing your opinion on vaccines or on COVID because you are a theologian.
Right.
Like, stick to the religion.
Yeah.
And what's your response to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, some people, it's a fairly common thing for me to engage in on social media, questions around vaccine and the virus and whatever else. It's not the only thing I engage on by any stretch. One of the things that happens on social media is if you engage with people on certain subjects, the algorithm will show you whenever they post on those subjects. So then you get a cloudy picture actually of what emphasis they are placing on something. Because if you don't want them to put emphasis on something and you get upset about that and interact with the post, you'll get shown more of those kinds of things. So some people have accused me of being obsessed, so I went back and scrolled to see, like, okay, how often, and it's like, well, it's way less than half. It's probably less than a third of my posts relate to, like, the most pressing thing happening in the world. I mean, not every single day. There's other things that happen, of course, but like over the last stretch of time. But I mean, why is a Catholic theologian really interested in this question? And I mean, there's personal reasons, of course. I find certain kinds of things interesting because of my personality or my, circumstances and the people around me. But as a Catholic, like, there's two huge things. The first is being pro-life. I mean, this is a life issue. Like, there are millions of people have died, and how we handle this shapes whether more or fewer people die in the future. So first and foremost, it's a pro-life concern. I think Catholics need to be really serious about those implications. And then the second thing is, as a theologian, I'm like deeply concerned about the credibility of the church to preach the gospel in our contemporary society. And when lots of Catholics are presenting misinformation in their social media feeds, when various Catholic organizations, what do you want to call them, news organizations or whatever, have made this a primary,
or flagship Catholic universities in some cases, in the case of my country, but
right. When there's major Catholic voices being part of spreading misinformation that is literally, at this point, killing people, and we can talk a little more about what I mean by that. I think there's a responsibility for Catholics who have a public voice, who have the capacity to engage in these kinds of questions, to say something about it, because it's about the credibility of the church, and I mean, if we as an archdiocese, for instance, were to cave to some of the loudest voices who are making certain demands on us, we would have contributed to the deaths of who knows how many vulnerable people in our community. I mean, if you've been to a Catholic church in Canada lately, it's the number of people over 70 is a significant percentage. Right. When we're looking at this from a diocesan protocol point of view, we say, like, those are our people, and whatever we do in how we celebrate Mass or whatever in this circumstance, we have to be protecting those people, right? And like the scandal, if we were careless with the lives of the vulnerable in our own community, never mind that creating vectors into the broader community, So those two big things, the credibility of the church and a pro-life witness, like this is a life and death question. And I'll explain the comment I made earlier about people dying from misinformation. In my part of the world right now, Saskatchewan, we announced, between 0 and 3 deaths per day, typically from COVID right now. And you look at the stats, and they're all people who are old enough to have one vaccine, and lots of them 2. And the government came out a couple weeks ago and said explicitly, everyone in the ICU right now is someone who could have had a vaccine and declined one. I mean, it's that straightforward. If you're dying of COVID in Saskatchewan right now, with very rare exceptions for people who are not medically indicated to get a vaccine, and we all need to get vaccines to protect those people, right? So taking out that tiny subgroup that was not medically indicated for a vaccine, if you're dying from COVID in Saskatchewan today, you're dying of misinformation.
Well, and I wrote an article maybe in early December of last year because Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, has been pretty outspoken in terms of refusal to get the vaccine. He's openly dissented. He signed the Athanasius Schneider public letter and has never recanted it. Since then, both the USCCB and the CDF have weighed in and contradicted what he said, or what that document says, and he's never backtracked from it. And so I actually titled the piece, and I mean, for all of you talk about obsessions and things like that, and people say we have obsessions with things. It's like the number of bishops that we have gone after, criticized by name where Peter is probably under 10. But I made the headline of that particular article. And I know you work for the church, so you don't have to win, but I made the headline a dangerous bishop, because he is the advice that he's giving is literally risking people's lives. And if people follow what he says, then that's, obviously it's a blow to credibility, and people could wind up dead because of it. So David, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, it's very true what you're saying, Brett. I mean, you look at people like, let's say, like Archbishop Vigano. He's someone who's created a whole sort of Catholic anti-vaccine cult almost, like through social media, through the news outlets, Catholic news outlets that publish his stuff. Every person who's in an ICU right now who could have been vaccinated but who didn't, this is partly on them. This is partly on people like Archbishop Vigano. They're going to have to account for this, and it's a terrifying thought. But it's hard to believe that they just don't care, or that they. I mean, it's so frustrating. And like you said, it's a counter witness. Absolutely, it makes the church, the rest of Catholics, and some Catholics have been doing an exemplary job, when it comes to this, and some bishops, even like Archbishop Vigano is a sort of extreme version, right? Like he just kind of comes out and he says, the vaccines are part of this, Freemasonic plan for global control and all this stuff. Other ones will kind of twist the official theology. So you have the USCCB, I think, saying that it's morally illicit to take the vaccine, but if some people decide they're going to make a heroic witness or whatever, right, that's acceptable as well. Now, for a lot of these Catholics who are already sort of anti-vaccine, they have a sort of LifeSite News mentality. Of course, they're going to go for the heroic witness option, right? Because not only does it give them an out here, they don't need to take the vaccine, but it makes them feel like they're braver, they're better Catholics. They're the ones who are standing up and I mean, I see this rhetoric all the time. This idea that the ordinary Catholics are kind of cowards cowardly. We're all just sort of, hiding in our homes and because, we're so corrupted by the world and all this stuff. And then, you got the brave Catholics who are willing to go without the vaccine and go to, take risks and go to mass and go out without masks and all that stuff.
And then go straight to heaven.
Yeah. And then, and they'll be rewarded for it. Right. It's a very powerful and dangerous narrative, but I find it's extremely troubling when it's sort of twisting the official theology by taking, what is supposed to be an exceptional, maybe a situation and then twisting it into something that they're all going to embrace as the norm, like this heroic witness.
Well, and two things that strike me about that. The first is when the Vatican says vaccine shouldn't be mandatory, but if you're not going to get it, you should take extra precaution to not become a vector yourself. The same people in my social media world who are against the vaccine are against social distancing and face masks and everything else. So they're not actually doing what the Vatican says, right? They're not saying, I will take a heroic witness to life by not receiving this vaccine that I see as morally compromised, even if it might be licit in some exceptional circumstance. I won't take it, and I will make a personal sacrifice by doing extra things to keep other people safe in order to make a witness. No, you say, I'm gonna do a heroic witness that also is really convenient for me. Like, that's not how heroic witness works. Heroic witness is a kind of martyrdom, right? It should cost you something. And so it's if you're not doing what the Vatican says for people who are doing this heroic witness and taking extra precautions, but you're actively advocating against such precautions or even mocking people who take such precautions, then you're not doing heroic witness. You're counter witnessing. I mean that's not the way heroic witness works. And I think the second thing I want to say about this is right now we're in this really awkward position, right? Every once in a while it goes through your head. You think like, sinner that I am, sinners that we are. You think, gosh, wouldn't be too bad if one of them got really sick and learned their lesson, And then you think, well, obviously that's a terrible thing for me to think, and I don't believe that. But what should I think? What I should think is I need to get vaccinated to protect the people who are antagonizing me on Facebook who won't protect themselves. Now this, right? We as a society it's incumbent upon us, as many of us as possible, to get vaccinated to protect the people who won't get vaccinated and who are actively antagonizing us at the time, right? So it's this hall of mirrors. It feels very surreal to think I need to, that part of my moral obligation right now is to protect the people who are, they're not all persecuting me. Some people just, disagree, but some people say vicious things, right? And make, public calumny and attacks and, question the faith of anyone who doesn't think the way they do, including, the Pope and the Pope Emeritus. It's kind of surreal to be in that position morally.
And I think one of the things that the CDF document, where it's being interpreted inaccurately, it says that the vaccines are morally licit and can be taken in good conscience. All of the ones that are currently in production or being researched are morally licit. And then they bring in the section about if for moral reasons, like we're here to form consciences, not to replace them. If your conscience tells you can't take it, then here's your obligation. But what I'm finding is they're not only taking that exception as a loophole, but they are then applying it to say that my position is actually the only moral position. And if it's like they don't see that, no, the CDF says it's licit. Like you can't say that a Catholic who does get vaccinated is not orthodox or is doing something immoral. And this is the kind of thing that I've found with like Amoris Laetitia, where they would say, well, and you have certain dioceses where they implement policies that do not allow any exceptions whatsoever. Which, if that's what the bishop thinks is the best pastoral response, okay, that's fine. But then when they go and say, like, the bishops of Buenos Aires or the bishops of Malta are doing something wrong and sinful and gravely immoral by actually following the document,
Right.
by saying what's permissible in the document. And I think that's one of the things. It's like if the church says that something is licit and somebody just goes along with it. I mean, it could be anything from communion in the hand, which the church says is licit, or it could be getting a vaccine. But people who decide to opt for either the more morally stringent or strict option will still judge the person who does the other licit option.
Right. Right.
Does that make sense? Maybe you're a theologian. Yeah. Maybe you could explain it better than I did. But
well, no, the point is a good one, right? I thought the communion in the hand is an interesting argument because you try to have it both ways. You want to say on the one hand, both, when it serves my side, I want to say both are licit. But then when the tables are turned, I say, but mine's better. And right. And so it depends on sort of where you're situated, which argument you prefer. And I mean, one of the interesting things about the argument that the vaccines are immoral is it became clear fairly early on in these debates that the level of sort of moral connection that at least the mRNA vaccines have with the cell line HEK293 is the same connection as Tylenol or Tums.
Yeah.
And once that became clear and it wasn't disputed. I mean, once it was out there, everyone was like, oh, that's kind of too bad. But in my neck of the woods anyways, the arguments against vaccines shifted away from being moral arguments and started being, and I think you can even see it on LifeSite News. LifeSite News was trying to make the case that these were immoral. And that just stopped being sustainable, even to LifeSite News readers who take Tylenol. And then it became something else, right? These vaccines are a massive experiment. They're going to lead to genocide. I was recently issued a summons. I'm going to be brought up for crimes against humanity by the Nuremberg protocols. Because
good to know.
Which is so after World War II at Nuremberg, one of the things that happened were protocols. And forgive me if I don't get the wording exactly right on this because I'm riffing up from memory, but protocols to do with experimentation, medical experimentation on human subjects, right? And the suggestion is that all of the testing that happened before the vaccine rollout was illegitimate because it was rushed or whatever. And so what's currently happening is a massive human experiment that all these people have been duped into unwittingly. And one of the things you can't do is dupe people unwittingly into medical experiments. And so if you, as a theologian for an archdiocese, gave permission or even encouraged people to get vaccinated, you're now implicated in a crime against humanity, and lawyers are standing by. I mean, it was a head spinning sort of email to receive. But yeah. And my point in telling the story is the target shifted, right? It used to be that vaccines are immoral. And now it's anything you can find. It's that vaccines are going to cause infertility. So, Mr. Archbishop, you can't tell people it's okay to get this. How are you going to feel in 20 years when none of the Catholic families can have children because you let them get these vaccines, right? Or it's the Nuremberg thing, right? It's one thing after another.
On that topic of the shifting narrative, I do have something to add. First, though, I just want to mention, because, I like to fact check when I say something. So I said that the USCCB had said that, it's morally permissible to take the vaccine, but it's not mandatory, right? And it was actually Archbishop Naumann who had mentioned this thing about heroic witness. And I think it was brought up in an EWTN interview. So I think that's where I just wanted to make it clear in case anyone was wondering that I don't think it wasn't that the USCCB were calling for people to make a heroic witness, but at the same time, people hear stuff like that and then they catch on to it, and that becomes their sort of loophole and their way of, fueling their own narrative. On that issue though of the shifting narrative, I've noticed a really kind of fascinating shift towards talk about these spike proteins. I don't know if you heard about this. the coronavirus itself causes these spike proteins. I don't know the science behind it. I'm just reading stuff online. And now when you take a vaccine, it also creates these spike proteins in smaller amounts. And the idea is that people who get vaccinated might shed these spike proteins. And when the spike proteins kind of reach other people, it can cause infertility, it can cause, miscarriages and things like that. So the idea is now that not only are people who get vaccinated, like dupes of the New World Order and all that kind of stuff, now they're actually harmful to other people, right? So,
Right.
People are saying, we got to like round up the vaccinated and like keep them away from the general population sort of thing. It's crazy.
The stunning thing about this, right? So the spike protein is what the virus uses to get into your cells. And so the vaccine, the mRNA vaccines teach your body, to make just that spike protein so your T cells and whatever else, I'm not going to get it all right, it can recognize it and respond. But here's the amazing thing about that. People tell me there's no reason to be afraid of the virus. It's not dangerous. If you're sick or dying from it, it's probably because your vitamin D was low. And in any case, you can treat it with ivermectin, like no problem. Everyone would be fine. If we weren't keeping the treatments away from the people, nobody would be dying. So they say on the one hand, there's no reason to be afraid of the virus, because like just take some vitamin D, and if you get, if you didn't have enough vitamin D before, well, take some ivermectin if you get sick, and no worries, right? They're terrified of minute amounts of a spike protein, which is just part of the virus, right? How am I safe from the virus if I have vitamin D, but I'm not safe from tiny fractions of synthetic virus? Like it's first of all, the shedding thing has been thoroughly debunked. I mean, one of the interesting things about mRNA is it breaks down so fast. It leaves nothing but a memory. I mean, it leaves a chemical memory that your immune system knows to recognize spike proteins, similar spike proteins in the future. But it's gone. That's why it needs to be refrigerated so carefully, because it's so unstable. It just breaks down. So it's an interesting, medical advance in that way, because it leaves almost nothing behind. But they're afraid of that. Where's your ivermectin? Can't that save you from the tiny little bits if it can protect you from a virus that's killed 3.5 million people? It's very bizarre. It's so selective. That's what's characteristic of the conspiratorial mind, is the selective application, right? The same principle, you don't apply it in the same way in an analogous case if it doesn't fit your narrative, right? And that's one of the hallmarks of conspiratorial thinking is that selective application bit.
Well, and I don't want to jump in here with my own conspiracy theory, but what you guys are both talking about here is kind of alluding to something that occurred to me very early on. And I think it was when Bishop Strickland and a priest named Father Michael Copenhagen, I think, who's in upstate New York. He's an Eastern Rite Catholic priest, but both of them have been very outspoken against vaccines. But they appeared at some virtual online conference. Both of them, I think, speaking about, this moral cooperation with abortion issue. But the lineup of speakers, was everybody from RFK Jr. to Wakefield, the vaccine autism link doctor from England. I mean, it was this list of like 20 people objecting, each of them with their own set of objections to vaccines. And I think for yuppie parents, it was, there's that autism appeal. And then for those who are a little bit more crunchy hippie types, it's about putting foreign substances into your child's body. And for Catholics, it's that tie to abortion. And I think when that argument fell apart because of, the tie to Tums and Tylenol, and even Diet Pepsi for a while, I think was using the cell line in their flavor testing. It seems that, like, if I was to say there's a conspiracy behind it, it's the anti-vax movement, which I don't even know what motivates that. Like, if it's just if it's just something that's caught on or just this conspiracy mindset. But it's like, to them, any argument that convinces one less person to get vaccinated for whatever is a valid argument to them. And
yeah, that's a really interesting thing, Mike, because you're getting these really strange bedfellows, like in the general anti-vax world now. Like you have like all the Catholics, and then you have the sort of natural healing type people, and natural living sort of influencers, and some of them are they're similar in the sense that some of them are like homeschoolers, like a lot of Catholics are, similar mentalities in some ways, coming together, but with very different fundamental beliefs. Or you're getting the anti-China people, and so they're all coming together behind this anti-COVID front, basically. But I think people who are getting involved in this have to watch out. Like you're getting further and further into getting mixed up with some strange people, and compromising in your faith and your critical thinking in so many ways.
And the algorithm feeds this. I mean, I was doing research for this show on lab leaks, and YouTube started showing me David Icke. I mean,
Wow.
Like this guy literally believes that we're controlled by like trans-dimensional lizard people, right? I mean, like,
well, that was true though, right? I thought.
Oh, well, okay, let's save for another show, Mike. No, but I mean, the point, once you're into any argument is a good argument territory, like it's not just a rabbit hole, it's like a chasm. Like it's really dangerous, right?
Well, I was completely shocked. I'm still shocked that I saw Naomi Wolf, the feminist, on Steve Bannon's show, ranting about COVID and stuff like that. So, like, it's incredible that you would have these two people like forging an alliance, but there we are. And she was just banned from Twitter anyway for spreading COVID misinformation. But yeah,
it's
wild.
Is he back on YouTube now? I thought he was banned from there. Maybe his channel.
His channel, yeah.
His channel, but it was videos of him anyways. Yeah. Look, one of the things we were planning to talk about, I mean, I was curious in a kind of analogy. I mentioned earlier that if you're dying now in Saskatchewan of COVID, you're dying of misinformation, right? And it struck me when that happened. I remember people coming out of the rabbit hole after the presidential inauguration, right? So QAnon said like, okay, this will never happen. And then it happened. And then step B would never happen. Trump was going to stop it, whatever. And like the inauguration was kind of the final stop for a lot of these people, right? Like that was going to be, what is it called? The thunder clap, or I mean, what the QAnon had this word for the storm was going to break.
The storm.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And it was, and everyone was going to get arrested and all this stuff. And Trump would be, installed for another 4 years and whatever else. And this got stretched on, until the inauguration happened, and none of that took place. And then people started saying, whoa, like, how did I get to this stage of believing this stuff? And I wondered to myself, when we get to the stage where the only people dying from COVID are anti-vaxxers, does that same thing start happening? And I think I don't think it happens in exactly the same way, because one of the things about COVID is it's built itself. So the conspiracies around the vaccines have built a safety net, which is, well, it might not happen. It might not happen for 15 years, right? We won't know about all the impacts for 15 years, and so they've built in this safety net, but what I started to see as more and more people have gotten vaccinated, and as people in your circles get vaccinated without ill effects, is the soft core of the anti-vax, right? And there's a spectrum. There's like, oh, I'm just a hesitant person in general, so I don't rush into these things, to like, I have these suspicions about these people, but I'm just going to wait and see, or whatever else. To the like, I'm pretty sure something nefarious is up here, but also people are dying. I mean, there's this range, but I've seen in my own circles this kind of crumbling of the soft core and to getting vaccinated. And it's really, only the hardest core that's, I mean, it's not the only thing left now, but my suspicion is that's what it's going to boil down to. It's going to be that like the hardest core will be left, sort of like QAnon, right? And because they will be forced into ever wilder sort of claims to substantiate what they've been holding to that point. I like, how does that strike you, that analogy, or is that what you're seeing in your circles, or what?
Two things are coming. Well, I mean, for me, two things are coming to mind when I look at Pope Francis. Sort of the decline against Pope Francis, which is kind of a parallel to what we saw maybe during the Trump administration, and as this QAnon and COVID stuff started happening. But it was, very early on, it was Pope Francis was concerning. Right. He was troubling. He was confusing. Then Amoris Laetitia came out, and he, all of a sudden it was like he was alluding to doctrinal error. Then the Dubia came out, and he was a heretic all of a sudden. And then Vigano came out, and he was like, the pinnacle of this corrupt, devious, diabolical thing. And one thing that like David and I have noticed, and we did a podcast a while back with Nathan Turowski, one of our contributors, and it was like, where is the bottom of this? I mean, and I don't know. I mean, and the thing is, it's like, yeah, I think a lot of people are dropping off, but like their dropping off point is pretty stable. Like they might think, okay, well, this microchips implants and the vaccine thing, that might be a little bit extreme, but that Cardinal Burke is pushing, but Pope Francis is still a heretic. It's like they reach their threshold and they let other people keep going without, and they're, okay, maybe we don't like the current Pope, but Vatican II, that mostly valid, I mean, and so I feel like with the COVID stuff, I think it's sort of like, okay, well, that guy is really crazy, but I mean, it's still COVID, the vaccine is still bad. I don't know. To me, I'm not seeing a huge, not everyone is going fully down into the rabbit hole, but I'm also getting a sense that that people aren't really bouncing back from it. I'm not witnessing it. Are you, David, witnessing people?
I mean, I don't know. I still see a lot of anti-vax sentiment out there. But yeah, I think that as we move along, it's going to be the hardcore that's remaining, because eventually people do have to decide, like, am I going to say, hey, I was mistaken about this. I got to pull back. I got to get back into the real world. Or are they just going to keep doubling down to the very end? And there are always going to be some who keep doubling down to the very end. They're going to, even if they all get kicked off the big social media outlets, they're going to end up on Telegram or, Parler or whatever opens up for them. They're going to create, and what's worse is that with these people, because they're going off onto these more isolated social media outlets, it's even more of an echo chamber. Yeah. And I think, the best thing for freeing yourself from conspiracy theory or just having a critical outlook in general is to be exposed to a lot of different viewpoints. That's like one of the key things. You got to be able to, question your own thinking a little bit every now and then in order to actually see clearly. And unfortunately, those people are not going to get that. But yeah, I do think, we also got to think there are probably a lot of people. I'd expect there are people who are online talking about how bad the vaccines are, and in real life, they got the vaccine. There's people who can be sort of like live a double life like that.
Well, I get the sense that half the people who are like, traditionalist trolls on Twitter either don't go to mass or have never been to a Latin mass in their life. I don't know, like the I don't know. It's like, what is your experience with real people? Because what you're talking about is not, human to me. But here's another an example from history, and I'm probably the least qualified of the three of us to talk. I'm suspecting to talk about it, but I think it was 1833 and 1844 in New York State, the Great Disappointment. I think the guy's name was William Miller. He was a preacher who, just like we had Harold Camping in 2012 or whatever, calculate the end of the world. Like the world's only going to last for 10,000 years. And this is, this date in 1843, so that, they sell all their possessions, and his followers and they would go up on the mountain in the white robes and wait for the end of the world, the rapture, to pull them up. And it didn't happen. That's the end of that. But went back down, did some calculations. Oh, we were off by a day. Okay, well, let's go back up the mountain tomorrow. And then and they went up, and then they were all raptured in the world. No, it didn't happen. So they went back down the mountain, recalculated it off by a year and a day, it turned out, from his original calculation. 1844, they all went back up the mountain, this time really hoping that they'd be raptured, because, they had been laughed at for an entire year. And I don't think there was a fourth time. But one of the things that resulted was a lot of denominations are linked to that. I believe, like Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, and a lot of those, Northeast, like something about mid 19th century in New York State was big for starting interesting religious traditions. I think even the Shakers may have come.
That was the time of I think it's the Second Great Awakening. There were these two.
Maybe. Even the Mormons kind of came out of the same area around, a few decades away from that. But the thing is, it's like, but those people who went up the mountain, they ate some crow about that particular incident, but they didn't actually change their mindset. They just found other people to follow and other things to do. So maybe David Icke will be the next, in
answer to that question, I got to say, so we're looking at what happens when, these things are predicted, they don't come true, and people have to deal with it's cognitive dissonance, right? Like, you have to deal with this cognitive dissonance and resolve it somehow. Now, and again, I'm shifting the topic a little because we have 15 minutes left, and I want to get to it.
I know where you're going.
Okay, yes. What do we do with when people, like, let's say people who are trying to think critically and trying to avoid getting sucked into this conspiracy world? What happens when these guys actually get something right? So right. And that's what we were talking about at the beginning, this idea of the lab leak theory. Brett, do you have can you add a little about the lab leak theory and what this kind of means?
Right. Yeah. So for people who don't know, where did the virus come from? Was it zoonotic, right? Did it come directly from an animal population, or did it come through a lab? And both those possibilities have been available from the beginning. Those were the two options. There's a major lab in Wuhan that does this kind of research. So, it's not crazy to think that that's one of the possibilities, right? But most of the narrative said zoonotic, right? And now, just in the last few weeks, it's looking like the lab leak hypothesis is more and more plausible, maybe probable. Who knows? We don't know, but it's a legit part of the discussion, right? And so, what this looks like, if you're thinking conspiratorially about a whole bunch of things related to COVID, one of the parts of the puzzle was the lab leak theory, and it fits a nice conspiracist framework because it's got nefarious actors and bad governments and lying scientists and lying media and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it fit nicely in there, and so it was immediately grasped upon. Now I want to say from the beginning, I watched the lab leak theory, and I thought to myself, I didn't think it was the most likely because the experts didn't think it was the most likely, and I hadn't seen evidence, otherwise. But there was a kind of plausibility. But then there were two different kinds of lab leak theories. There was like, hey, there's a lab in Wuhan, and they do certain kind of work there, particularly what's called gain of function research, where you give viruses capacities in order to study them so you'll be better prepared for a pandemic. Well, they do that work at that lab, right? Okay, that's a plausible thing. Then you could go the other way, and you could say like it was like a bioweapon developed by China and released to destroy the world and upstage all the economies and whatever else. Like, right? you could make plausible cases, not definitive arguments. We don't have those yet, right? You can make plausible cases, or you can make wild speculations. And those are not the same. They're not of the same epistemological value. And so if what you were involved in was wild speculation, you were not just vindicated. I'm sorry. That's if what you made were plausible hypotheses that awaited evidence, and now you've got some more evidence in favor of your hypothesis. Hey, good for you, right? Like that's the way this should work. But the deeper point is, what makes a conspiracy theory is not simply the content; it's the form of the argumentation, right? It gets really weird. We said 2 weeks ago there are actual conspiracy theories, what I mean to say is there are actual conspiracies in the world. And every single person, conspiracy theorist or not, every single person knows that if there was a lab leak in China, the government of China will conspire to cover it up. Like, there's nobody who doesn't think that, right? Nobody thinks that China wouldn't try to keep the lid on this if it were, right? So everyone thinks China is likely to conspire if this is the case. Does that make everyone a conspiracy theorist? Not in the way we typically use the term, right? That would be just changing the meaning of the word in the way we usually use it. And so I think it's important to recognize that, like, the analogy is like, okay, I'm in grade 10 math class and I got a question right. And then I looked and I had actually made two different mistakes that canceled each other out. Now, should the teacher commend me because I got the answer right? Or should they say, actually, your process is wrong. You were right by luck this time. But if you keep applying this process, it's not going to work out well. And you're not going to get to truth regularly by doing it, right? And so whenever something like this happens, the question is, what worked here? Was it wild speculation without evidence that worked? Or was it making a plausible case that worked? And the worst thing that can happen is we say all other wild speculation is now on the table because some wild speculation got lucky, right? Instead, we should say, like, no. And here's where it ends, right? If we end up finding out that the lab leak theory is either maybe we can prove that it's the case, or at least it becomes the most probable situation. How did we find that out? Not by the wild speculation, only by the careful reasoning of the experts.
Not the people at their keyboards in their basements with their tinfoil hats. They weren't the ones who figured that out.
Yeah, the deep irony is you don't trust the media, and now the mainstream media says that this is plausible, and now you say even the mainstream media says it's plausible. Wait a minute, doesn't that mean I shouldn't believe it now? It's this selective application process again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this comes up a lot for me, when I'm looking at what's going on in social media. Like, another example is we're talking about China here. There's been a lot of anti-Chinese propaganda, I guess, being produced these days. A lot of it comes out of Steve Bannon's radio show, Pandemic War Room, which is he's working with this Chinese expat billionaire who wants to take down the CCCP, and so that's their mission. Now it's not that I'm a big fan of China. I think there's incredible number of things to be concerned about when it comes to China, including stuff about the Uyghurs that we've heard about. I don't know if you know about this, but that this ethnic group is sort of being they're trying to kind of rid them of their sort of ethnic roots within China and replace them with sort of adherence to Chinese communist ideology. Now, there's a lot of truth in that, it seems anyway, like the information that's coming out, but it's so hard sometimes when you're trying to disentangle the real truth that's coming out about the Uyghur situation from the kind of like spewing of anything that they can find that makes the Chinese look bad that you get from these people like Steve Bannon. I found an article back from September 2020, a Vox article, and I'll put it in the chat after I'm done talking about it. But it was talking about how Steve Bannon and this guy Miles Guo, who's the billionaire who's helping him, they were promoting this new study that came out that said that the coronavirus was created in a Chinese lab. Now, the thing to notice here is that the study didn't actually say that it was just created in a Chinese lab, but also that it was intentionally released, or at least that's the theory of the study's lead author, that this was intentionally released into the world. Now, people at the time, scientists at the time, looked at the study, said it's completely flawed. It's not based on any real argumentation, so it was rejected. But the Vox reporter said that the people that they were talking to, the experts that they were talking to, did not, discount the idea that the virus had come from a lab. It's just they didn't think that this paper proved that in any way, and also it was tied to other, even bigger accusations that require even further proof, like the idea that this may have been some kind of bioweapon. So it's very difficult to you can look at that and say, oh well, this person was right, but I mean, were they right? Were they just throwing stuff out and seeing what stuck? And or if they may have been partially right, but you have to disentangle these things. And always, when you make any claim about a big claim like this, like that this was produced in a lab in China, or that it was like a bioweapon, these are extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence, right? So you can't base these on just rumors or weak observations and things like that. You have to actually base it on a really sound argument, like you've been talking about, because a lot rides on these things.
Right. And the gain of function argument, right? They're doing that research there. So like the gain of function argument is like, how did we get this particular kind of virus, is a plausible argument. And it works with data we already know from what actually happens in this lab at Wuhan. Something like intentionally released bioweapon is like, it's not an impossible thing to happen in the world, right? It's a thing that could theoretically happen, but to presume that that's the most basic explanation for something where we already have like pretty plausible, like this is Occam's razor, right? Like, yeah. Like a lab leak, an innocent lab leak from a place that's doing this kind of research is your primary hypothesis if you're a lab leak hypothesis, right? The released bioweapon is just like, it's attractive because it's sensational and it's something they would want to keep down and whatever else. But what kind of evidence would it require? And that's a question to ask always, is like, what would have to be true for that to be true? Right? What other things would need to be true? And how would I know those other things are true? Whereas I already have a pretty plausible set of conditions for what I'm calling an innocent lab leak, right? So like differentiating between these various hypotheses, it's not just, oh, lab leak is true, therefore everything is true. Like, well, you got to do that sifting.
And not only that, I mean, okay, whatever the origin of the virus, it got out, right? And all the other conspiracy theories, the anti-masking, the anti-vaxxing, I mean, was Pfizer in on it? Was Moderna, was AstraZeneca in on it? Or were they just trying to address this virus that had come out and trying to find a way to prevent it? I mean, right. It doesn't tie into the vaccine development unless you've got like some huge, just totally conspiratorial mindset. I mean, right. That would have to mean that the researchers and I mean, the researchers in the US and Canada and Europe and India, like, I mean, they were trying to address the virus. They weren't, I mean, they didn't know where it came from. They were drug developers. They were vaccine developers. And so, okay, well, here's our problem. This is how we fix it. It doesn't matter whether it came from a bat or whether it was released maliciously onto the world by the Chinese government. It's, right. It's still a
purpose
virus.
of the vaccine. Yeah. I mean, it does matter for other, right? I mean, one thing I want to grant to, it's a warning that David gave at the beginning, right? We don't want to reject things out of hand because we're asking other people not to reject things out of hand, right? If it suits the narrative, then I accept it. If it doesn't suit the narrative, I reject it. We're saying, conspiracy theorists shouldn't do that, and neither should we. And one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is it was easy to dismiss the lab leak theory, even if it was plausible. It was easy to dismiss it because of the boy who cried wolf, right? And there's two parties at fault in the boy who cried wolf story. Actually, we think it's typically just the boy who cried wolf because he made a mistake, right? I mean, he lied, and then people didn't believe him. That's true, and he shouldn't have lied. And so the conspiracy theorist has set themselves up to not be believed by engaging in bad public reasoning, right? On the other hand, there actually was a wolf the third time around with that boy. And so it's incumbent upon everyone else to not dismiss everything because a conspiracy theorist would like it. And that was the temptation with the lab leaks. Even though there was a plausible hypothesis, it was tempting. And social media platforms made this mistake, right? They didn't differentiate necessarily between different lab leak hypotheses. They said lab leaks are for conspiracy theorists. And so some people were shut down. And what that does, that doubles what's the word I want? That puts the conspiracy theorist into that position of doubling down, right? Like it's from a scriptural point of view, you'd call that hardening the heart, right? When you dismiss someone when they shouldn't have been dismissed with the term conspiracy theorist, then your capacity to think through conspiracy theory thinking with them is diminished. And so one of the mistakes that was made here was the too easy dismissal by not making the distinction that we've tried to highlight here, which is it's not just the content of the theory, it's the form of argument. And that applies whether you're promoting it or dismissing it, right? Otherwise, you become the mirror image of your enemy, So I agree with you, Mike, 100%. It doesn't matter for vaccine developers, but it does matter for public discourse on this level, I think. And I think that's an important.
And we have to be careful not to treasure certain narratives too much, right? And like you said, this actually applies to the conspiracy theorists too. Like with this paper that came out last year in September that said that this may have been the COVID may have been created, or not COVID, but the coronavirus may have been created in a lab. Maybe if they had presented it, just that itself, it may have had more impact than if the lead author hadn't gone on Tucker Carlson apparently and then said it was intentionally released. So now you're adding this narrative to it. But we have to watch out for the same thing because we want to have this narrative where, I mean, we don't want it would be nice if this was a naturally occurring virus, because then no one's really at fault here, right? This is
not to the same degree. Yeah.
Not to the same degree. This is something that's just really unfortunate that happened to the world. If it was a lab leak, then there's actual maybe geopolitical consequences that come out of this. And then, of course, if it was like an actual like bioweapon, right, then there's huge geopolitical consequences. But we have to be careful not to, like, I want it to be a naturally occurring thing because we don't have to go through all this, but and we don't need to face, like, say, the anti-Chinese racism, which you get, we have I don't know if you get it out in Regina, but there's the newspaper called The Epoch Times that gets published and distributed sometimes for free to people's mailboxes. And it's all like stuff about coronavirus and how China's responsible and stuff like that. And it's, it seems to be generating some real anti-Chinese sentiment, which could get out of control. And I mean, I'd like that to be not true. If it is true, if it turns out to be true, then okay, we have to modify our narrative and try to think this through again in a way that doesn't put the blame on all Chinese people. And, we got to actually think it through, figure out where the blame really resides. So I guess the overall lesson is we have to be careful and cautious and patient as we go along, right? And there's so many bad actors out there who are trying to push things one way or the other. We have to be just extremely prudent in the way we go about investigating this.
And suspicious of our own temptations, right? We're tempted. The lab leak theory, you can check my public statements. I never said anything against it. I never called it a conspiracy theory or whatever else, right? So I can stand on that. But I will admit, I did react to it dismissively once when it was presented in a list of other conspiracies by Patrick Coffin. And he had listed a bunch of other conspiracies and he listed this. And I just sort of, well, of course, that's what he would say, right? And I was not completely wrong, but there was a mistake I made in there because if I was being really honest, I could have said not all those things are exactly the same, right? But it was easy for me to see the person saying the nonsense and be dismissive. And so it's important to check ourselves because we can get committed emotionally to a narrative, and that's the enemy of our rational engagement, right? So we're running out of time. Can I finish by telling a story?
Yes, please.
Absolutely. Please. Yes. That'd be great.
So I was on 2 weeks ago. I said that my wife and I had been vaccinated and our boys were going to get vaccinated right away. We have 14 and 12-year-old boys. And so we're feeling good about it. You too?
Yeah.
Okay.
My two oldest, 14 and 12 boys.
Right on. So then we heard from some people who were concerned they shouldn't get the boys vaccinated. Have you heard that there's some, teenagers who are getting the vaccine are experiencing heart problems, so you shouldn't get them vaccinated. Okay, so I look into the heart problem. Myocarditis is being reported among some teens who've received the vaccine. We don't yet know if that's at a higher rate than teens get it normally. So that work still has to be done. But whether or not there's any connection with the vaccine, what we do know is that it's extremely rare and in fact mild. People aren't dying from it. Myocarditis is an inflammation of a heart muscle. It happens often in human living. Most people who get it never even know they got it, don't go to a doctor, don't get diagnosed. And so, we did the research, myocarditis in teens, and here's the real kicker. It's more likely to be caused, and more severely so, by COVID than by a vaccine, right? So adding all that together, we said, well, we'll still get the boys vaccinated, So we're out at a friend's farm last night, outdoors, not yet indoors, but we're playing outside, and it's a hot day here in Saskatchewan. And my 12-year-old Oscar, he's running hard all day, and there's water fights, and they're running in the bales, and Oscar has asthma, so running on the farm is a little risky, and it's dusty and whatever. So and then we eat a bunch of ice cream and all kinds of things that make you feel good in your body, right? So we get home, it's 10 o'clock at night, and Oscar's like, Dad, I think my heart it hurts a little. When I breathe, when I take a really deep breath, I feel something here that's it's not comfortable. I'm not sure what should we do. And I said, maybe just try to rest and breathe and drink something cold and see if it feels better, whatever. Anyways, so you got this 12-year-old who has an experience of something, who knows what, that feels like it's near his heart. Now, here's the end of the story. Oscar's not vaccinated yet because we haven't been able to coordinate things with our pharmacy. The day we called, they were out of supply, and we got busy and we had to check back in. Now, here's why do I tell the story? Because if you are looking for the vaccines to be a problem, then any adverse health impact had by anyone who is vaccinated is now attributable to the vaccine. And Mike, you talked about this last week in the story with your sister, right? Oscar didn't have the vaccine, but if he did have the vaccine, people would be 100% certain that any little feeling he had in his chest was attributable to the vaccine. I had a relative who had a stroke within a few weeks of her being eligible for the vaccine by her age. She wasn't vaccinated when she had the stroke. But if she had been, 100% guaranteed, the people around her who had been telling her not to get a vaccine would tell everyone that the vaccine caused her a stroke. Now, she didn't die from the stroke, so don't panic or whatever. But I mean, this is the kind of thing, and this is what happened with your sister. And here's the flip side of it that I just became aware of. Now let's imagine that your parent has an adverse health effect. Maybe they die after receiving the vaccine, and you're convinced 100% that their death is attributable to the vaccine because of what you read on the internet. Everything is now attributable to the vaccine. What does that do to your capacity to mourn well? Your life is now a battle with the media, with the health establishment, right? Like, all of your time and energy and anxiety is going to go into fighting for justice for your deceased parent. When there is, the chances are slim to none that the vaccine was responsible. So on the one hand, there's people experiencing what you experienced, Mike, which is awful enough. This kind of terrible, well, of families in mourning, people are trying to attribute, a heart condition that was 20 or 30 years
40
in the
whole
making,
life, 40 years, over
right?
40 years. Yeah.
To the vaccine. But the flip side is when those people's own loved ones die. And so, I mean, the basic story is all other causes of adverse health effects are now gone. There's no other reason that anyone gets sick. If you are vaccinated, it is the cause of whatever happens next. If you're 70 years old and most of your social circle are people in their 60s and 70s, adverse health impacts happen like weekly.
Yeah.
In your circle, right? And so one of the reasons this thing is going to hang on for a while is because it's been built to be confirmed by all these incidences. And we need to watch for that, because even those of us who are furthest away from trying to not to be conspiracy theorists, I'll tell you, if I had gotten Oscar his vaccine the week before and then his heart was hurting, I'd sure wonder, and I throw it out there in case it helps anyone, right? Like, if that's your family and you're having to deal with that, the data to find is, does this happen with more frequency than it was happening in the general population? That's the key question, because the anecdotal stuff is such, what's the word I want? It's an optical illusion, right? The anecdotal stuff is
and the guy just heard that somebody died that was in her 40s and
maybe vaccinated.
Yeah.
And, it also points to the idea here that, we're not doing this, talking about this stuff in order to make fun of people who believe in this or to, to mock anyone, because we know that people can get sucked into this stuff, and even really well-meaning people. Right. And so, part of the reason that we're talking about this is to help people pull out of it.
That's the whole premise behind Where Peter Is, really.
Yeah.
People were buying into these crazy conspiracies about Pope Francis or about Catholic doctrine. Really, they're having these faith crises that they aren't even willing to admit, because they've bought into these false narratives that, from a Catholic standpoint, are generally impossible. And they're people we know, and they're people we love, and we're all Catholics, and we know that this is a real phenomenon that goes on in our circles. And, I hate to say it, but it's like a lot of our leaders didn't step up, didn't become the adults in the room, didn't try to nip some of these things in the bud. Or if they did, they weren't heard. So, that's what we're...
Or didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Navigating social media, and I think social media is such a huge factor here, is tricky. And I've learned a lot in a couple years reading about this stuff and reading about conspiracy theories. Most of our bishops can't be experts in social media.
Oh yeah. Well,
even from a generational point of view, right?
Yeah. Well, I had a flippant line in my, I don't know if you read the article I published a couple days ago, but that the average U.S. bishop social communication strategy with their flock is their weekly column in the diocesan paper and a press release every once in a while. And the diocesan paper is probably out of print and online only, and you can't even find his column anyway. But, we just lost Brett. Anyway. Well, I guess all
right. Well, maybe Brett decided, he's like, oh, we're at the end of our time. I'm going to get out of here.
He's going to come back, and he's going to say goodbye. Hold on.
All right. Sorry, Brett, we lost you for a second. But maybe
I clicked the wrong
this
button.
is a good.
I was looking at comments and I clicked the wrong button.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Well, maybe
As
it's a good time to wrap up. That's good. Yeah.
So
what
much
were you
about
going to say?
social media
Final
recently,
word.
I clicked the wrong button and disappeared.
Yeah.
Final word, Brett.
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, my story was my final word, right? I mean, but it points to the larger question, which is like, from where we sit and what we see determines so much of how we think about things. And that's true whether it's an anecdote about health or whether it's the social media feed that the algorithm feeds us because what we've taught it about ourselves or whatever it is. And it's really important whether it's anecdotes versus bigger data in medicine or whether it's my feed versus the broader world of information to step back out of my little bubble. Right. I mean, the great irony of social media, which was supposed to connect us, is that it siloed us, and the bubbles are so hard. And all of us are in danger of misreading the situation because our bubble only presents us with certain angles. Right. And so that applies at a few different layers here. And just to invite people to figure out ways to zoom out from the thing that they've zoomed in on. I think the biggest one is actually spending time with people instead of on our screens. And that's been really hard in COVID. So as the restrictions lift, reconnect with people. If there's someone you've had a breakdown with on social media over this time, go for a beer with them, with family, right? I mean, we've got, I know your story, Mike, my story. It's hard to talk with family about certain things on social media. Talk with them about other things. Yeah. Like don't lose that connection, right? Like send a nice note to someone you disagree with about vaccines, about the Blue Jays. I like anything. Pick something human to connect with.
I really just to end it off there. I really like that idea that we should take some time to zoom out. Because we spend a lot of time, social media helps us zoom in really tight on certain subjects and certain controversies. Take some time to zoom out and look at the rest of the world and, go outside, talk to people. It can do wonders.
Well, we're way over time.
All right.
Two quick things. Two things.
Okay.
First thing is if you like Where Peter Is and the Critical Catholic and Where Peter Is Live and the podcast, consider becoming a Patreon sponsor. Click underneath any of our articles or on the right-hand column of wherepeteris.com. And there's a link to our Patreon page. And then finally, the season finale of Where Peter Is Live is this Thursday. Taking a break, just because it's summer and stuff. We had Jeannie Gaffigan, our big celebrity guest, on Thursday. So look for that. It's on YouTube now, and I'm going to upload the video one probably later tonight, the audio one to wherever you listen to podcasts. So anyway, until next time, God bless and take care.